It's a while ago since I left school. It must have been like 25, nearly 30 years ago. What piece of advice would you give a young person when they're leaving education now to achieve success?
That's a really good question, because times have changed radically since we were both at school. It sounds like probably about the same time, Jim. But the reality is that I would always advise anybody to think, right, what do you know, who do you know, and who knows you?
Right.
More importantly, it's evidenced, well evidenced, that now parents are incredibly influential at finding opportunities for their children.
Yeah.
So I would be knocking on my parents' door saying, who do you know?
Yeah.
And who's important, or who might be able to provide some coaching for me or an opportunity for me. That's really, really key. I would be looking at my social media profiles in the communities of the people that I'd want to look at my profiles, and I don't mean Facebook. What I mean is that the professional community use LinkedIn more as a social media platform than Facebook. Equally, I would be starting to follow people who are influential on Twitter. So, you've got to be proactive. Don't think the world owes you a living.
During your career, who would you say has been an influential mentor to you that's made a difference?
Probably in 2001, I met a psychologist, Jim, who quite by accident through a third party actually, and I'd never spent time with a psychologist before, and they sound quite scary people, but what psychologists do is make you reflect a lot about who you are, how you work, and how you can be your best. So a lot of us sort of, I guess in plain speak, have got a lot of software bugs in our systems, which can inhibit the way that we work. And what psychologists do is find ways to make you conscious of those things and then fix them and install new updates into your system which allow you to work in today's world. And I think the learning that I got from that in 2001 was a pivotal point in my life, because I suddenly started to develop a greater awareness of what impact I had on other people and how I could be my best and work to my full potential. And I can look back exactly to that time in 2001 and say, that was the time, that was the trigger, that was the person.
How did you come in contact with them?
Quite by accident. We used to sell products on a television channel called QVC that people might know about. And a presenter that we hired, it was her husband actually, and her husband was trying to get into the business marketplace of psychology. He was a sports psychologist, and she said, would you meet him for a coffee? And I said, of course I'll meet him, because for me it sounded like an interesting opportunity. He sounded like an interesting guy, and actually it proved to be a brilliant meeting. So it was a chance opportunity, which I think is an amazing lesson there, which is always be open to opportunity. I call it opportunity engineering. Always understand that everybody that you meet might provide a gateway to you to achieve something different in your life.
So you talked a little bit about your mentor, and that was through a psychologist that pretty much changed your life. Are there any people that you sort of consider like a role model, someone that you've modelled yourself or so on?
I guess nowadays I'm probably a bit more in the sort of the camp of people like Tony Robbins, who's quite a famous guy who talks a lot about emotional intelligence and just kind of being a really good version of you and in the current state that you are. But I guess as I grew up, you'd always start to look at the obvious candidates like Richard Branson and go, I want to be like Branson. He's successful, but he looks really happy, and he rides powerboats and jumps out of aeroplanes, and it all sounds really quite amazing. But one person that always stood out for me is a person no one will ever heard of. He's a Scottish cyclist called Graham O'Brien. He was a guy that was from a background, but he just happened to have this amazing talent for cycling. And he decided he wanted to break the world record for the fastest man to ride for an hour in a velodrome. And he had no money, no resources, no sponsors. He built an old bike out of a washing machine, which he called the Old Faithful. And he trained like crazy, worked like crazy, when other people had millions in resources and he had nothing. And he broke that record.
Wow.
And it's people like that always give me inspiration, that regardless of what you have, you can create great things. I have a lovely saying that I like to use with people, that the older generation will remember an airline called TWA, and that used to stand for Trans World Airlines. They were kind of like the Virgin of maybe the 1980s. But that also stands for what's called a three-letter acronym, which is thoughts, words and actions. And successful people, if you look to successful entrepreneurs or people like who are chief executives of large companies, what differentiates them is they put thoughts and words into actions. And so the action part of it is the most important. So if you've got a brilliant idea and all you ever do is think about it and talk about it but never do anything about it, then you're only ever going to be the T and the W. But if you really want to fly in your life, fly TWA. Put your thoughts and your words into actions.